Welcome to Amici, news and insight from a New York court. I'm John Carr. Our guest today is a man who grew up in poverty and occasionally in homeless shelters with parents who were addicted to drugs. Somehow, some way, that least likely to succeed young man, with all the odds stacked against him, is now an acting New York State Supreme Court Justice in the Bronx. The Honorable Raymond P. Fernandez worked his way through John Jay College of Criminal Justice and CUNY Law School, and clerked for three judges, including Court of Appeals Judge Jenny Rivera, before Governor Hochul appointed him to the Court of Claims 2 years ago. He was promptly designated an acting Supreme Court Justice by Chief Administrative Judge Joseph Zayas. Judge, thank you for coming on, Amici. Tell me about your home life as a child, if you would.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your interest in me foremost. So I was born and raised in New York City. My family and I spent the first couple years of my life navigating the New York City shelter system. We were homeless until ultimately, when I was about 6 years old, we settled in Spanish Harlem. And so Spanish Harlem is where I was raised. That's where I went to school. My home life. Getting right into it, huh, John?
Sure am.
My home life was difficult. My parents were very badly addicted to drugs, and they had been my entire life. I was born into that situation with them. And so my home life was difficult. We lacked a lot of the very basics. We often didn't have food. Very, very basic things that, we take for granted: soap, deodorant, toilet paper, things like that. The electricity was often cut off, so it was, it'd be dark in our apartment. I had no means it was rough. I didn't really have proper clothes. I had no means to wash my clothes, no way to do laundry. So it was hard. It was very hard. That was the hallmark of my home life until, for all of my childhood.
So until you were six, you're moving from one homeless shelter to another, basically?
Yeah, so that's right. So when I was born, my father was the super of a building. He was the super of a building on 29th and Lexington Avenue. And that came with an apartment. He was a live-in super, and he lost that job. And when he lost that job, we lost the apartment. So the marshals had removed us from that apartment. So we entered the shelter system, and I was very little. I remember some of it. I was very little, but back then in the early 90s, New York City was grappling with a homelessness crisis. And so it was like a congregate shelter. I remember other families being there. I remember it being a big space. I remember sleeping on a cot, things like that. And then you sort of advance through the shelter system into what they call tier two housing. I don't know if this still exists today, but tier two was still a homeless shelter, but more private space. This is when you get an apartment. This is when you get a door that locks. And so we advanced into the tier two system until finally we were approved for Section 8. And that's how we got the apartment in Spanish Harlem, was through the Section 8 program.
So you're 5, 6 years old, you're in Spanish Harlem, you're starting school. What were your early days in school like? Did the other kids know what your home life was like? Was it embarrassing for you?
It was yes, it was difficult. A neighborhood so big is still a neighborhood so small. So everybody knew who my parents were. Everybody knew, you don't want to be the little kid that goes to school and everybody's like that, your mommy and daddy are crackheads. You know what I mean? So it was very, very difficult. Everybody knew who my parents were. You could see my father outside collecting cans. You could see my mother outside collecting cans. Digging through the garbage for things that they could sell. So everyone knew, and I was tormented. I really was. I was constantly made fun of. I had a very disheveled appearance. My clothes I didn't have many clothes, but what I did have was, tattered and filthy. Mismatch, never weather appropriate. I didn't really have a warm jacket in the winter. My My appearance was often disheveled. No one paid for me to get a haircut, so I had very long, unkept hair. So it was very, very difficult. Kids can be very cruel, and they were.
What about the teachers? They must have known.
Teachers knew, and I had teachers that I had some of the best teachers, and I had many teachers that took a real interest in me. And I was always told when I was little I was a smart kid. I was always told I was smart. I was always told I could write very well. That's something I remember going back all the way to. I was probably in maybe sixth grade when I was told, you write really, really well. Why don't you write more? Why don't you write stories or something? And I was like, huh, okay, interesting. As far as what was going on at home, I mean, I'm certain teachers must have known what was up because, no one ever went to like a parent teacher conference. There was no, this was before cell phones. We didn't have a house phone. So it's not like you can call my house to reach a parent. So it's basically like, as long as I was showing up, there must have been some sort of adult, interaction at home. But that was it. But I had some of the very best teachers. I remember I was probably seventh or eighth grade. I think it was eighth grade. And I didn't have a jacket. I was wearing like a windbreaker in the middle of February. And I remember a teacher who I'm friends with to this day. Her and another teacher had bought me a jacket. They'd bought me a winter coat. And they had held me after class to sort of give it to me, and they gave it to me in private. And it was very, very kind, and I'll never forget that kindness. So there were many teachers back then that, it didn't give rise. I guess they didn't see anything that they felt they needed to report to any, authority, but they definitely knew what was going on. It wasn't hard by looking at me to know that, I didn't come from much.
Interesting to know that a random act of kindness a few decades ago resonates with you still.
Yeah, John, I'll never forget it. That teacher was at my wedding. We're very close friends to this day. I'm supposed to have dinner with her soon. We're very close friends.
What a wonderful story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
did there come a time when you made a decision to climb out of what seemed to be your destiny?
Yeah, I mean, climb out is climbing is the operative word here. I was probably, I'm trying to think about how old I was at the time. I was young. I had to be about 12 or 13 years old. And I was a big Yankee fan. I'm still to this day a very big Yankee fan. It means the world to me that my chambers look at Yankee Stadium. It means the world to me because when I had nothing, I had the Yankees because I could follow them on the radio, right? I could listen to baseball. And so it was a season when we didn't have electricity, and it was dark in the apartment, and the Yankees were in the World Series. And it was something. It had to be 1998. It was an incredible team, a storybook team, and it was a World Series game. I don't remember which one, but I was sitting with my father in a bedroom. It was dark. We had a candle lit, and we were listening to the game on a small single speaker radio. It was battery operated. It had like one AA battery in it or something. And we were listening to the game, and mid-game that battery died. And it was just, it's, the story, the more I think of it, the more it almost seems silly, but that was my breaking point. That battery died, and I couldn't hear the rest of that game. And I was like, this is just, it's one thing after. I was just so fed up. I was so frustrated. It's one thing after another, and that just broke me. I can't even listen to a ball game like this. Nothing about the way I came up was ever normal. But to not even be able to just listen to a ball game on a rate, never mind, we don't have electricity. You don't have another AA battery. I was just so frustrated, and so I said, I'm not going to live like this. I don't want to be this way. I don't want to be with these people. I love my parents very much. But I don't need to be like them, and I don't need to be with them. I don't need to be here. And so I told myself, this is it. Nothing's going to be given to me. I have to take it. And so I made a plan that I was just one day at a time. How do you build a wall? Brick by brick, one brick at a time. I am going to climb out of this. It has to be me. The cavalry's not coming. No one's going to come rescue me from this. I have to do it. And I had hatched a plan that the way to do it was through school. Maybe that's something I saw on an after school special. Maybe I saw it on a poster at school, but I saw school as my ticket out of that situation. And so I said that, it's got to be me. I have to set the alarm. No one was waking me up for school. I have to set my alarm clock, and I have to get out of bed on my own. And if John, I know you have kids, I have kids. Yeah, I go away. I got to kick my kid out of bed every morning. All right, honey, time to go pick out her clothes. And then I got to get her to school. I got to make sure she eats breakfast. I had none of that. It was me. When that alarm goes off and it's 5 degrees outside and you got to walk to school, that's hard to do when you're like 12, 13 and there's no adult telling you that you have to do it. It took a lot of foresight. I was just forced to grow up at such a young age, but that was my epiphany. That was my moment. That game. It was the '98 Yankees. That battery died, and I had just about had it. And I was like,
That's fa-
I'm gonna do this.
that's fascinating because the normal trajectory would be someone growing up like you follows the pattern that they were used to. Why do you think you were able to see that there was something better and that it was potentially open to you if you took the initiative?
I don't know. I wish I knew. If there was I wish I had some sort of secret formula that I could share with the world so that I could help anybody else who's feeling the same way. If I could bottle whatever I had when I was 13 and that battery died, I would share it with the world. I really would. I just, it must have been teachers who told me I was smart. I must have just known that school would be my ticket out. And I must have it's the only thing I can think because I remember being like, okay, this is it. Like school is it. Like, and then the other part of it was I knew that if I could just get through, you get through school one day at a time, one week at a time, one semester at a time, one year at a time. And so I knew that by pushing my way through school, if I could just get to college, no one will know me. Okay, I'll have a fresh start. No one will know who my parents are, right? So it became my mission, like just get through this year, this day, this week, this year, and you'll get to a place where no one knows you. You'll start fresh, and then that'll be your ticket. It's always I was just always chasing some light at the end of the tunnel that I just had to tell myself that was there. It was blind faith. It really was.
So then I think you eventually end up at John Jay College. Is that correct?
I do. So I did that. I pushed through high school and I applied to all of the CUNY schools and I got into John Jay and it's exactly what I knew it would be. I showed up for class and I was a stranger. No one knew who I was, no one knew who my parents were. Everything was a fresh start. The one thing about college is everybody's paying to be there, so no one's horsing around, there's no distractions in class, everyone is quiet, there's no fights, there's nothing like that. Like everybody who's there is dead serious about it. They want to be there, so that was really a fresh start for me. And I just had to make it work. And so I was going to school and by then I had started working. And so what I did was I went to school full time and I worked full time. So I would go to school Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then every other day of the week I worked. I held restaurant jobs. I had every job that you could hold in a restaurant. I was a waiter, a busboy. I was at one point a line cook. I was a food runner. I was a bar back. I was a bartender. I did every single job you could do in a restaurant, and I liked it. I liked being. I liked the service industry. I liked meeting different people, communicating with different people, seeing people from all walks of life. And it got to be really funny where it was like I was working so much that when I got to go to school for those 12 hours, I used to call that my day off because I got to sit down. So,
Oh my goodness.
I just was trying to build something, just trying to do something for myself.
So at what point do you start thinking about maybe becoming a lawyer?
So that started when I was very young, and lawyers were just something that I knew. My mother was always in trouble. She was always getting arrested, whether for, possession of something or for jumping the turnstile to take the train or something like that. Um, and it was always a public defender that got her home to me. You know what I mean? And same thing with the apartment. Our Section 8 covered maybe probably 3/4 of the rent, but they still didn't even make up that 1/4 that was their portion. So we would get, a dispossessed notice. They would try to throw us out constantly. And it would be a legal aid lawyer that came to the rescue there too. So I had gotten it in my head that like, wow, lawyers always save the day. That's really cool. Like I'd like to be able to help people like that. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer so that I can help people in my situation and I can be someone who can kind of save the day. And so I put that in motion. So by the time I was probably in my second or third year of John Jay when I said, all right, well, if this is what I'm going to do, I need to be serious. I need to be serious. So, it was after one of my shifts, whether I had, waited tables that day or whether I was bartending. After one of my shifts, I took the tips I made that day and I went over to Barnes and Noble and I picked up LSAT study books. I picked up LSAT study books. And I said, all right, this is okay. And I kind of thumbed through the books and I said, all right, no big deal. So I progressed through and I sat down in I can't remember if it was my junior or senior year of college. I sat down and I said, all right, I'll take the test. And so I sat for the LSAT and it was this grand thing at like the Hilton Hotel. And I took it and I bombed it. I mean, I bombed it. I mean, I scored something like, I think I scored something like 142, 144, something like that. And I was like, okay, I can't do much with that. But I said, not all is lost. I didn't take it seriously enough. I was always a very smart kid. I took it for granted. I need to take these books that I have and I need to really, really study. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to really, really study. So let me lock in now and I'll really, really study. So now I go through all the books I had purchased and all the practice tests, and I sit for the exam again, and I don't do much better. I scored something like 146, 147, and I said, all right, I don't know what I'd be able to do with that, but we'll see. So I took that score and I applied to CUNY Law with that score. And I didn't hear anything back. So I said, uh-oh, I'm in trouble here. I'm in trouble. I said, this damn test. So when I didn't hear back from CUNY, I had finished college and now I was out in space, right? Because, once you graduate school, you lose sort of that safety net of being able to say, well, I'm a student, I'm in school. It's like, no, you're just, you're not in school anymore. You're an adult. So what are you doing with your life? So, I began to get very nervous, but I knew it was the test that was the obstacle because I had gotten good grades at John Jay. So I said, it's the test that's the obstacle. So I got to do something about this test if I have any realistic chance. So I looked into LSAT study courses. Like I know the books I had bought were Kaplan, and so I knew that they had in-person classes. And so I was like, all right, maybe I'll do something like that. So obviously I had no money for that. So I took out a loan. This is my grand plan. I said, I'll take out a loan. I took out a personal loan for $5,000 and the interest rate was like 24%, something astronomical, bordering criminal. But I was desperate. I needed the money and it was go for broke. Like, let's do this. Like I have to if I'm going to get into law school, I have to do this. This is a necessary step. Right. So I take out the loan, I get the money, I give the money to Kaplan and I take what's called an LSAT boot camp. Okay. So the LSAT boot camp is like 3-4 nights a week. And then all day Saturday, there's a practice test. And all day Sunday, there's a practice test. And so I would work my shift. And then at night, I would go and I would take my boot camp class. And then on the weekends, I would take a full length practice test. I think the test is something, at least when I took it, was 3 hours long, sitting still for 3 hours. So 3 hours on Saturday, 3 hours on Sunday. And I was having a really hard time because even with the instruction, and even with all the practice, every time I would score a practice test, I was still only scoring something like 146, 147. I could not break that number. That number was breaking me. I could not break that number. And I was like, what the hell? So now I'm in debt for this. Like I could score 140.
Let me back up 1 second. So
Go
you're
ahead.
scoring in the 140s. What do you need? What do you need to get into law school?
So I had come up with this idea that I just needed something higher than that. That's why CUNY didn't call me back, right? I need something higher than that. So I pushed through this LSAT course, even though I refused to be discouraged, even though I was in tears every weekend scoring these practice exams. I refused to be discouraged, and I sat again for the exam. I sit for the exam, I take the exam. Whatever happens is going to happen, right? That's been my whole life. Whatever happens is going to happen. So I take the test, and while the score is pending, I have a shift one day, and I check my phone, and I got an email from CUNY Law. And the email had the subject line, an opportunity for admission. CUNY had created a pipeline program, and the pipeline program was 2 parts. The first part was they had identified kids that they thought, but for their performance on the LSAT, they could be good lawyers, right? Excuse me. So the pipeline program that they had come up with was 2 parts. The first part was intensive test preparation, and then you sit for the LSAT. And if you score over 150, you advance to the second part of the class. And the second part of the class was basically like a first year law school writing class to sort of get you ready for what a law school exam looks like. They figured that's the 1-2 punch. If you can score over 150 on the LSAT, and if you can take this class and you're introduced to what legal exams are before you get to school, you can be successful in law school. That's their formula. So I said, okay, I immediately applied to the program. I got into the program and I told them, listen, I already took an intensive LSAT course and I sat for the LSAT already. And they said, oh, very interesting. So your score should be coming out soon. When your score comes out, reach out to us and let us know. I said, okay. So I'm sort of just, I'm still living at home. I'm having a very hard time at home because, it's still very unstable. I'm working every night, working every day, and my parents are stealing from me. I would work a night shift and I would make all this cash and tips and I'd wake up and it'd be gone. I'm still fighting this battle at home, and it's really, really frustrating. And I'll never forget. I went to the movies. This is obviously all a true story. So I went to the movies. I went to see The Dark Knight. It was Christopher Nolan's Batman movie. And so I went to see The Dark Knight, and I'm sitting in the theater, and an email pops up, and it's from the Law School Admissions Council, LSAC, and it says your score report. My LSAT score had come back. And so I'm sitting there watching this movie, and I see that, and I don't want to open it. I'm so scared. It's just an entire lifetime of frustration has led me to this moment. This moment, that whatever this number is, is really going to decide my future here. And I just started praying. I just, I need a break. I need to get out of where I am. I feel stuck. I feel trapped. I feel hopeless. I'm sorry, I get emotional every time I talk about this. It's such a seminal moment in my life, sitting in the
I'm getting
movie
emotional
theater.
listening to it.
I just sitting in that movie theater, but the world felt so heavy. And I remember praying. I said, God, just let me score over 150, please. And I had never done that before, right? How could it be possible now? And I said, please, if you do this, I will run with it. I will get into law school. I will go to law school. I will get a law degree, and I will do the most good that I can do. I promise. I will. I promise. I just need a chance. My whole life, I never asked for a handout. I just asked for chances. So I said, okay. So I opened the email and I scored exactly 151.
Wow.
So, and the world, I must have, I can't tell you what happened the rest of that night. I can't tell you what happened. I can't tell you anything about after that, because it's just, this tremendous weight had been lifted, because that was such an obstacle in my way, that exam, and so okay. And I'm sitting in the theater crying, right? Batman isn't an emotional movie. People must have thought I was crazy. So I'm sitting there, I'm just bawling my eyes out. And it's just like, everything had come up to this point. I said, okay, like I'm going to do this. I'm going to be able to do this. So I reach out to CUNY and I say, I got my results. I scored 151, and I sent the score report, and they write back, congratulations, that's wonderful. You advanced to the second part of the program. We'll see you for the second part of the program. And the dean, I think she was the dean of academic affairs. I forget, one of the deans. She was lovely. She reached out and said, well, in the meantime, why don't you come and watch a law school class? Why don't you come visit and watch a law school class? And I thought, oh, that's cool, right? So I'll do that. So I take a day off of work and I venture to CUNY Law. And silly me, I didn't realize how far it was. CUNY at the time was out in Flushing. So I'm like, okay, so I'll venture out to CUNY. 2 trains and a bus it took me to get out to CUNY Law. So I said, oh man, I got off this bus and I started walking. And I said, okay, it's all right. This is doable. I can figure this out. So I go to the law school. I meet with the dean. The dean gives me a tour of the school. And she says, I'm going to pair you up with a professor. You can watch a law school class. I forget what the class was. I'll take you to meet her, and she'll take you from there. And otherwise, it was very nice to meet you, and we'll see you in, I don't know, the spring or the fall, whenever the second part of the program began. And I said, okay. So she brings me to this professor, and I meet this professor, this woman, and she's lovely, and she's asking me about myself and my background and where I'm from, and she tells me a little bit about herself, and she has all these books, and she has like this boom box, this radio. If people know what a boombox is, like literally operated with D batteries, like this heavy thing. And she says, "Oh, I like to play music before class starts because it sort of, relaxes people. It takes the edge off." I said, "Oh, okay, very interesting. Play music. Okay." So, she grabs all these things and it's towering. And I said, "Professor, can I help you with something?" She says, "Yes." She hands me like the boombox. So I'm carrying this thing. So she brings me to her class, and she wasn't kidding. She puts down the radio. She turns it on. It's blasting music super loud. I'm sitting there going, what the hell is going on, right? She stops the music. She goes up to the bulletin board, and she starts giving her, she starts doing her thing, right? And she's very animated, very passionate, very into it. You can tell, super knowledgeable. And that professor was Judge Jenny Rivera. And so,
Wow.
yeah, and so from that day, from the day I met her until today, she hasn't been able to get rid of me. She has not been able to get rid of me. So she's just incredible. So I had no issue with the second part of the pipeline program. I started the second part of the pipeline program. I came through, I gained admission, and I started law school.
So you get into law school and you've already got a nice connection with a very prominent and renowned professor there, future Judge Jenny Rivera. How did she influence you in law school?
Well, so I will say before that, I didn't have too much of a connection just yet. I had just met her. When I started law school, she was my property professor, and I had her for lawyering seminar. And one day I was in the cafeteria, if you can call it that, whatever the room is where we ate. CUNY, the old CUNY, before it moved, it was in a smaller space. And I overheard some students talking about Professor Rivera, and they had said, she's very intense. She is. She's very intense, and her exams are hard. But if she likes you, she'll ask you to be her research assistant. And I sort of was eavesdropping, and I got wind of that, and I said, "That's interesting. Research assistant. That sounds really cool. That's very interesting." And so the semester began to progress, and in lawyering seminar, we were assigned a brief. And what it was an appellate brief. Someone had filed an appeal, and it was your job to file the respondent's brief. That was your job, to write the respondent's brief. And so, I mean, I'm all of like 23 years old. So I had hatched this plan that if I do really well on this brief, maybe she'll notice me, right? Maybe Professor Rivera will notice me, and then maybe I'll have a chance to be her research assistant or something like that, right? So, a daydream, really. So it was my 1L year, and it was the weekend of like Valentine's Day, and I locked myself in my bedroom, and I sat down and I wrote my brief. And it was so interesting. She had planted little things in there to trip people up. Certain cases that were cited didn't stand for that proposition. Little things like that. And I said, "Oh, this isn't, you're not sneaky. I see what's going on here." And so I did my respondent's brief, and I submitted it. And then I, like everybody else, there wasn't no round of applause or anything after I submitted it. But one day, Professor Rivera says to me, "Do you have a moment? I'd like to speak to you after class." And I was like, "Oh man, what did I do?" Right? Like, why does the professor want to speak? She never said a word to me otherwise. Why does she want to speak to me after class? And so I said, "Okay." And so now I'm headed back to her office. And I remember let me carry that boombox for you. I'm helping her with all her books, and I'm carrying the boombox. We go back to her office. And at the time, CUNY Law sat across the street from a cemetery. So she's sitting at her desk, and behind her out the window is graves. As far as you could see, just tombstones, right? And so I'm sitting there, and I don't know what she's about to say. And she says, "I had a look at, you did a very nice job on your brief. I think you're an excellent writer, and I'd like to recommend you for the Puerto Rican Bar Association scholarship." And I wish there was a camera on me, I must have, my soul must have left my body. I mean, really, I just, this is something I had daydreamed about. I wanted to write something to get her attention, and I had done it. And it was I, you know, John, my whole life, people told me I was a good writer, my whole life. But there was something about when she said it that really, it meant the world to me. Law school was very, very scary for me. I was showing up every day, 2 trains and a bus, carrying these heavy books, sitting in this huge classroom, praying I don't get called on, scared of my own shadow. You know what I mean? And it was really hard, and I had no support system at home. It's not like I could go home and talk to my parents. Oh, I was in class today, and I don't know how it's going, and I'm nervous, and there's no one to talk to. So it's just me in my own head in this long commute. And so what she had really done for me in that moment was she validated me. I felt like I belonged there. I had made the right decision. I had made all the right moves up to this point. Now I had been asked to do something that lawyers do, and I had done so, and I had done it well. And this distinguished professor is pointing out that I had done it well. And so that meant the absolute world to me. That carried me the rest of my career. The rest of my law school career, it carries me to this day. That there's something about her unwavering belief in me that I just needed when I was that young kid, and I had no one else. And that's it. I mean, that's it. I had used that to really carry me the rest of law school.
Did she push you in law school?
She did. She's very intense. She doesn't settle for mediocrity. She doesn't. The bare minimum is never going to be good enough for her. I think her bare minimum is higher than others. I mean, her bare minimum is normal for some people. She did. I mean, her influence. She influences me to this day. I mean, to this day, I find myself sitting down, writing a decision, working on something, and I'll hear her voice in my head, like, okay, so what? Like, did you write about this? Like, what about that? Like, you have to explore this, you have to explore that. To this day, very influential.
So you get out of law school with a commitment you made to God to use that law degree to do good, and then you go to work for the Legal Aid Society. What did you do there, and how did that dovetail with the promise you made to God?
Well, so look, I kept my promise. I said I would do the most good that I can do with a law degree. As I progressed through law school, it was probably a 2L. Maybe I'd gotten into my 3rd year. I was very good at criminal law, and I was very good at criminal procedure. So I said, all right, I think CUNY has a very good defenders program. I think I want to be a public defender. Right. That's how I can touch a lot of lives. That's how I could do the most good. That's strong advocacy. That's in line with my vision for myself and me being in public service. And, that's what I want to do. And so I had pushed hard to do that. And I had got accepted into the Defenders program. And I got hired by the Legal Aid Society to do that, to be a public defender. And so I was a public defender out in Queens. And I wasn't there long. I was there for about maybe 16 months when I caught a glimpse of the cover of the Law Journal. And Professor Rivera had made the shortlist for the Court of Appeals. And I was like, wow, that is incredible, right? And so I didn't think much of it because obviously I think there's 8 others when you make the shortlist, right? So I said, that's really cool. And I kept about my business. And sometime later, the cover of the Law Journal was, she got it. She got picked. I said, oh, wow, this is incredible. Still not done yet, right? You have to get through the Senate. But I said, wow, that's so incredible. And so, again, going about my business, I was doing misdemeanor work at the time. So, I'm doing night arraignments and cool things like that. And I had taken the bar without any issue. And I was admitted and I'm a lawyer and I'm doing these things. And, it's all very cool. And then she's confirmed to the Court of Appeals. And I was like, mind blown. This is so incredible. So I reach out to her and I say, congratulations. And I tell her again how much she meant to me in my law school career and how much of it I owe to her. And she was very gracious to me. She reached out and said, thank you so much, whatever she said. Thank you so much, whatever it was. And she goes, why don't you think about applying to be my law clerk? And I was like, I didn't say it, but I was like, hell yeah, right? So I immediately got a resume together so fast. and I got a cover letter together, and I shot that down there to her, and she set up an interview, and I went to see her, and we sat down, and she said, she's known me, right? She's known my work, and so she's like, well, why do you want to do this now? Like you could defer. Well, do you want to go and try cases at Legal Aid or something like that and get some experience and then come back for this opportunity? And I said, no, I want to do this with you right now. Right. Everything about me has always been like, you got to strike while the iron's hot. Like, no, you're new at this. I'm new at this. Let's figure it out together. Let's do this. And she took a chance on me. She hired me. She took a chance on me, and she was very kind. And she gave me a 2-year clerkship because she knew I was quitting my job at Legal Aid to do that. I was upending what I had built thus far. So she said, in fairness to you, I'll give you 2 years. And so, suddenly everything progressed from a few years before me having such a difficult time getting into law school to now I'm a lawyer to now I'm clerking on the Court of Appeals. It had really escalated so quickly. And that was intense. That was intense. She is an incredible professor. She is an incredible judge. She's incredible. I've never met anyone who works harder than Judge Rivera, ever.
A word keeps popping up. Every time you mention Judge Rivera, I hear the word intense.
Yeah.
What was it like working for her, and what kind of hours were you putting in working with a brand new judge, not only new to the judiciary, but obviously new to the Court of Appeals?
Oh, incredible hours. I mean, late nights, early mornings, all the time. She's a force. She really is. She took right to it. And, you have no choice when someone is that dedicated, but to follow their lead, so how could I get tired and not want to, push through when she's right there with me. Right. So there would be nights when we were up in Albany and we'd be working until 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and she'd be, all right, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Let's go get some rest. I said, all right, fine. So we put it down 4 o'clock in the morning. She goes, all right, so what do you think? We'll meet back here at 7. And I'm doing the math in my head. What? Like we leave at 4. You want me back here into it? But she got the job done. She continues to get the job done. She is incredible. She's incredible. It's, if I could be a quarter of the judge she is, it will make for a very, very successful career. It really will. She's just no one else like her.
Now, she showed a great deal of confidence in you. Let's be honest. You did not have a ton of legal experience going in there.
Yeah.
You would never clerked for a judge. Did you feel a lot of pressure to meet her expectations?
A tremendous amount. I still feel pressure to meet her expectations. I mean, but it's going on a decade. I still feel pressure to meet her expectations. It was one of those things that when I got there, it was very scary. It was very scary at the Court of Appeals. When I got there, I was the only law clerk that didn't come from an Ivy League background. I was the only one. And again, it was just her unwavering belief in me. I must belong here. I can't sit here in self-doubt. If she thinks I belong here, she's smarter than I am, right? Right? She's always taken these. Why would she take this chance on me? She's a new judge. Surely she needs good help alongside her. So I did the best I could. I can't say I matched her energy because I don't think anybody can. I don't think that's humanly possible to match her efforts, but I did the best I could. I did the very best I could. And I hope she thought so too. I hope she thought that I hope she thought I was a good law clerk as well.
A lot of former Court of Appeals clerks, and you had basically a 2-year stint. A lot of former clerks I know go on to work for white shoe law firms and make all kinds of money. You went into private practice for a couple of years, and then you find yourself back in the judiciary, now clerking for Honorable Norma Ruiz, a trial court judge. So how was that? Why did you want to get back into that line of work? And how is clerking for a trial court judge fundamentally different than clerking for a judge on the highest court in the state?
Sure. So there's a few. Let's break it up. There's a few things there. So I left my clerkship with Judge Rivera, And I sort of kicked around a little bit, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to stay in the court system. I knew then, when I was with Judge Rivera, if I could have stayed in the court system, I would have. Again, it was just my commitment to public service. I really liked what I was doing. I liked the subject matter. I liked the challenge that it presented. So I really liked being in a part of the judiciary. So, but the jobs just weren't open. There were no one was hiring back then. The jobs were a little more scarce. And so I said, all right. So what I did was I kicked around some mid-sized law firms. So I went to a mid-sized firm down on Wall Street, and I did that. I did insurance defense. And then I lateraled to a firm in Westchester that was closer to where I was living. And I did that. And I was really trying to figure out how to break my way back in. And actually, before I left the Court of Appeals, Judge Abdul Salam, rest in peace. Judge Abdul Salam, I was sitting with her one day and she said, Ray, you're looking for a job? And I said, I am looking for a job. I want to stay in the court system. I'm looking for a job. I'd like to continue being a law clerk or a court attorney. Everybody uses the phrase interchangeably. I want to be a law clerk. I want to be a court attorney. I want to stay in the system. And Judge Abdul Salam says, you should go talk to a good friend of mine. He's the nicest guy in the world. He's the administrative judge for criminal matters out in Queens. Why don't you, his name is Joe Zayas. Why don't you go talk to Judge Zayas? And maybe he can see if anybody has any openings and he can help you out. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I reached out to Judge Zayas, and he was as nice as he could be. He said, hey, why don't, come out to the courthouse. Let's have lunch. And I said, all right. So, again, I used to work right across the street from that courthouse when I was at Legal Aid. And I had actually appeared in front of Judge Zayas a few times. And I said, yeah, absolutely. So I trekked my way out to Queens and I sat down for lunch with Judge Zayas, and he was as nice as he could be. I'll never forget. I sat across from him and he said, he says to me, I know you're a smart guy. You clerked on the Court of Appeals and all that. But who are you? What are you about? Who are you? And I told him everything. I told him about my parents. I told him about how I came up. I told him about how I got into law school. I told him about clerking for Judge Rivera. I told him about how hard it was to clerk for Judge Rivera and, struggling with sort of, imposter syndrome and all these things. And I'll never forget, he was sitting right there with me. He's just nodding his head the whole time. And he's like, yeah, but you go through it. You go through it for a reason. You'll be okay. You'll be okay. And so he says to me, well, what do you want to do? And, I said, I want to be a judge. I had known I wanted to be a judge. And so, when you're a young kid and you say you want to be a judge, it's like telling people you want to be an astronaut. Everybody kind of looks and smiles. They're like, oh, that's nice. That's very nice for you. But Judge Zayas didn't do that. He looked at me dead serious and he said, okay, you want to be a judge? Okay. He goes, well, one route to becoming a judge is a lot of principal law clerks become judges. That's a route you can take. And I said, yeah, deal. Okay. I need to be a principal, whatever that is. I didn't even know what that was. Whatever that is, I need to be a principal law clerk. I'll do that. And he says, and Judge Zayas, who has now, he's been very open about, his father's struggles with mental illness and, all of this is very public about him, but he had shared that with me when we had lunch. And so, it was really sort of this thing where it was like, he was like this beacon where it was like, and now look, he runs that whole courthouse. Now look, like these things can happen. What I'm asking for is not what I'm fighting for here. It's not such a long shot. And when I told him I wanted to be a judge, the look in his face was like, all right, so I'll see you when you're a judge, kid. Like, okay, and I'll never forget that. And so nothing ended up happening. The jobs just weren't there. So I kicked around the two mid-sized firms, and then one day I get a text message from a number that's not saved in my phone, and I look, and it's Judge Zayas, and he says, "Hey Ray, hope all's well. Hope you're doing well. I noticed a posting by Judge Ruiz. There's a posting on Judge Ruiz for principal law clerk. If you're interested, go apply." And I said, "Yeah, he didn't have to think of me. This was like 2.5 years later. He didn't have to think of me." And I said, thank you so much for thinking of me. I really appreciate it. And sure. So I go on the court system's website. I find that posting. I apply to Judge Ruiz. So I apply to Judge Ruiz and I get an interview and I go and I meet her. And she's incredible. She's intense too. Right. So it's just like, I'm like, okay, from one intense judge to another. And she says, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be a judge. She goes, oh, you want to do this because you want to be a judge? I said, that's right. I want to be a judge. And so she says, well, you clerked on the Court of Appeals, so you can write, can't you? And I said, among other things, yeah, I can write pretty well. And she goes, do you know civil practice? And I'll be very honest with you, John, I lied. I said, yeah, civil. I know everything there is to know about civil. No problem. And she said, she sort of shrugged her shoulders and said, all right, all right. And so she hired me. She hired me. I left the firm, and now I'm working for her. So just to get into the second part of your question was, what's the difference? Well, the hours are better working at Supreme. I'm not there until 4 o'clock in the morning. I've never been there until 4 o'clock in the morning, thankfully. There's a big difference. It's volume wise. There's a lot of volume in Supreme. It's you can't sit down to draft every motion decision and write Shakespeare. You know what I mean? It's not like at the Court of Appeals, and don't get me wrong, every case is important. Every single case I touch, I genuinely feel, and it's true, every single case I touch is important. It's important to the people who are litigants. It's important to the lawyers. It's important to everybody. So don't misunderstand me when I say that, but when you're at the Court of Appeals, every issue you touch is of statewide importance. The whole state is watching. Whatever is written lands on the cover of the Law Journal. Whatever is written is published in a book. Okay. I've probably decided 3,000 motions. Not one thing has been published in a book. Okay. Like it's so, so the volume was different. It's different being down in the trenches, so to speak. You get to see the parties, you get to see the litigants, you get to try to settle their cases, you get to work through their disputes through a lens of, first impression. Right. By the time something gets up to Albany, it's, Supreme Court had it, the appellate division had it, several years have gone by, and now there's this sort of framed issue for them to take up in Albany. But it's different. But Judge Ruiz was great. She was great. And, I told her I wanted to be a judge, and she took training me to be a judge very seriously. When she was on trial, she allowed me to sit next to her. She walked me through her rulings. She asked me what I thought of her rulings. She asked me how I would rule if it were me. She had a ton of patience for me. She really did. It was incredible.
There's some very influential people who, let's be honest, didn't need to give you the time of day. And they did. Judge Rivera, Judge Abdisalam, Judge Zayas, Judge Ruiz, Judge Gonzalez.
Yeah.
What is the importance of mentoring?
Oh, I can't. It's not even, John, it's so interesting. It's not even like mentoring. You'd say mentoring, like like you meet someone and you take them under your wing. It's just being kind to someone, giving someone the time of day. I have a rule. It's not posted anywhere in my courtroom, but I have a rule that whenever a child is present in my courtroom, they get to sit on my bench. Whether it's for an infant comp, whether one of the attorneys doesn't have childcare, so they kind of sneak one of their kids in to add an appearance. If a child comes into courtroom 625 in the Bronx, they are invited to sit on my bench, because you just don't know who needs to do that. You just don't know. You ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a lawyer. Good. That's incredible. That's incredible. If I can help you along the way, that's you. Sometimes mentoring is just believing in someone. The fact that Judge Zaya said okay when I said I wanted to be a judge, instead of, there were plenty of other people I said I want to be a judge. Wow, I don't know. When I left one of my law firms, the partner, he was a nice guy. The partner who was my managing partner, he goes, you got a long road ahead of you, kid. I mean, the political machine doesn't work this quick. And I just kind of nodded my head and said, okay, that's all right. I know. I appreciate that. I'll figure it out. Just believing in someone can be enough, and so any child that comes into my courtroom sits on my bench. Anyone.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Now, is serving on the bench further fulfillment of that promise you made to God in the movie theater?
Yeah, I think so. My goal has always been to touch as many lives as I can, and I think I do that. I think I do that, whether it's the kids who come in and get to sit on the bench, whether it's kids that I talk to that visit my courtroom. Public service in general is what I promised to do, and it's what I'm doing. One case at a time, moving one case at a time, even if I can only move it an inch forward.
How do you think your background impacts the way you judge, the way you look at the world as a judge?
I have a lot more empathy. When people are in litigation, It's obviously very adversarial, and tempers can flare. And there's always something behind anger. You know what I mean? There's always anger masks a real emotion, you know? And so given how I came up, I'm always wondering what people's motivations are, right? You're angry about this, but why? And if you can get to the heart of why people are angry about something, and if you can sort of divorce them from their emotional connection to something, you can settle a case. You can settle a dispute. You can move a case forward. Um, so yeah, it does.
Now, I'm sure you're very busy with your job, and I know you have a growing family, including a newborn child.
Yes.
But I noticed you're active in the Latino Judges Association, and you serve as co-chair of the 12th JD Equal Justice Committee. Why do you make time for things like that?
The answer, John, is I haven't made enough time recently. Because I have my 8-year-old daughter, because my wife was pregnant, and because now we have our little boy, I haven't made nearly enough time for any of the associations that I need to make time for. But I will get better. I will get much better. I will commit to it as my little boy gets just a little bit bigger. I will go back and I will get better. Um, Listen, we live in a time right now where the word diversity has been politicized. And, the term DEI has become derogatory somehow. And so I will just say this. When you walk in to your local courthouse, the people that work there should look like the community they serve. Full stop. Full stop. I don't know. I don't understand how this is, I'm not interested in debating this. That's just the way it goes. And so organizations like LJA, my work with Equal Justice, that is what those organizations are meant to do, to make sure that, the more diverse the decision makers are at a table, the better the results, period. I mean, that's science. That's science. That's not political rhetoric. That is science. So I'll leave it at that.
I'm sure at the Court of Appeals you saw exactly that. I mean, you had 7 people, all highly intelligent, all rather opinionated, probably some of them a little stubborn, but from entirely different backgrounds. And that would work its way into a very solid foundation in the law, right? Isn't that the
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah. Yeah. More voices, better results. More voices, more backgrounds, more opinions yield better results. More inclusion, period. And inclusion is not a bad word. But I don't want to say more again because somehow it's been politicized. I don't want to say more, but that's a fact.
It is a fact. Something that sticks out to me prominently listening to your story is an absence of the victim mentality and a focus, and ever since your Yankee game epiphany, on creating a better life for yourself. Is that innate or something you learned along the way, not to have a victim mentality and to be focused?
You
Where's
know,
that come
I
from?
I think it's innate. It has to be. I just absolutely refuse to be like my parents. You know, I didn't have any role models growing up, but I had people that I didn't want to be like, you know, and I didn't see any way around it. I had to just go through it. And that's it. And that's it. How do you build a wall? Brick by brick. And so I built it brick by brick. That was the best I can do. One rung of the ladder at a time.
Well, and finally, how can someone growing up in an environment similar to yours learn to stand on top of rather than be buried underneath their past?
Again, I think it was Dr. Maya Angelou who said, we don't choose what happens to us, but we can choose not to be reduced by it. It's sometimes you can't go around, you have to go through it. And if you're going through it, keep going. Keep going. One step at a time. Take a look at your environment. What can you control, right? Are you in school? Okay, you're in school. Can you go to school? Yeah. So go to school. Can you focus in class? Focus in class. One step at a time. What can you control? Because too often we look at things and all we see are obstacles. And if all you see are obstacles, you're not going to get anywhere. But what can you control? And so it's one step at a time. It's one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time, 1 year at a time. And things get better. They get better. Hard work ultimately pays dividends.
What a wonderful and inspiring message. Judge, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for your service.
John, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.